Okay, it is now 6:02 p.m. and good evening. I'm calling this meeting to order. My name is Gabriel Harp, Chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. As Chair, I'm calling this meeting to order, and we are holding this meeting from Council Chambers in Ann Arbor City Hall. Welcome to the January 14th, 2025 meeting of the Energy Commission. Commissioners, let's see. Public comment today will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public, And in person. We're revising the script a little bit here. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following two toll-free numbers, 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099, and enter the meeting ID number 956-8718-7876 on your phone. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city's website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN Channel 16, AT&T Channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. And we also have public comment via the podium here in council chambers as well. We will move on to the land acknowledgement. Joe, do you mind please reading the land acknowledgement?
Yes. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, Bodewadmi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained.
I'm not seeing other people joining.
Oh, wait, hold up. Hey,
we are in council chambers.
Oh.
So we're here. We see you.
Oh, criminy. I forgot it was in person. Okay.
It's all good.
Okay.
We'll do our best to make this work.
I'm so sorry. No, I can come down. I just was confused. I was like, where is everybody? Okay, I'll be there in like 10 minutes. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Sounds good. No worries.
All right, back to land acknowledgement. Apologies for that. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you, Joe. Would you mind taking the roll?
All right. You don't have to say where you are because I can see you. Commissioner Berkowitz.
Present.
Councilmember Briggs is on their way. Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Present.
Chair Harp.
Present.
Vice Chair Hans had a conflict come up. Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Councilmember Malik.
Here.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here.
And Commissioner Overpeck also has a conflict tonight. But Chair, you have a quorum. Back to you.
Thank you, Joe. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as posted and a second?
To approve the agenda.
Thank you. Second. Commissioner Colvin Garcia. Okay. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you want to propose any changes or discussion issue. Seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the agenda as posted, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and say no. The motion carries. The agenda is approved. And now to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as posted and a second? So moved and seconded. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you want to discuss any aspect of the minutes. Seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the minutes as posted, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. The minutes are approved. Moving on to the public input portion of our agenda, this is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. And this information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To raise your hand and your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone, and you'll hear an automated announcement that's allowing the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any background sound so that we may hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And for those in attendance, please approach the podium.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Ken Arbor, 28 Haverhill Court.
Mic got turned off. We were on it.
I should know how to do it. There we go. Thanks. As I was saying, Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. This is kind of surreal, but nice. I'm glad you're doing this, and I hope you do more of these in person. I think Commissioner Mirsky and Commissioner Colvin Garcia may remember, as I do, the last time Energy Commission met in person, which was in March 2020, at the Ann Arbor Senior Center on Baldwin for a work session. At that meeting, I was there as a member of the public, and I was pushing Energy Commission to move forward with an ordinance to ban gas connections in new construction. Well, that has since gone off the table, but the problem has not gone away. And basically almost nothing has been done in the last 5 years on this issue, and we're still approving new construction with gas connections, which in 2025 just putting fossil fuel infrastructure in new buildings just seems it would seem crazy to me then, but now it just seems, I don't understand why we're not making progress on this. Anyway, tonight, I really look forward to the benchmarking presentation by Mr. Daly. I haven't had a chance to really look over the report and the slides in detail, but I have a few questions. The report mentions a nearly tenfold increase in compliance from May to December 2024. Clearly, there's been a heroic effort made by Mr. Daly and probably others to bring building owners in line, so I thank them for that. They deserve a lot of credit. But there's still a huge shortfall. The 820 plan timeline specifies a 90% compliance rate by 2025, and here we are. The actual compliance rate, as I read the report, is 32% for the most recent reporting year, 2023, with a 50% participation rate. So I guess one question I would have is, when will the city start to levy the fines for noncompliance that are specified in the benchmarking ordinance? I think that's $500 for first offense and $1,000 for every additional offense. Or maybe we're doing that already and I'm not aware of it. My other question is technical. In the Y benchmarking slide, there's an example included for a building profile 413 East Huron, which I think is the Foundry Lofts building. Based on the indicated electric and gas usage,
30 seconds.
Usage, thank you. I did my own calculations, came up with greenhouse gas emissions about 24% higher than what's on the slide. I'm using OSI's electricity conversion factor, but I'm using my own gas conversion factor based on one that NASA climate scientist Peter Kalmus recommends, which includes all upstream emissions. So I'm just wondering why the difference, and that's a question I can probably deal with offline with staff. But those are my questions, and it's great to see you all here, and thank you for your work, volunteer work on the commission.
Thank you. No callers online.
Okay, we will move on to the main presentation of today's agenda. This is the City of Ann Arbor Energy and Water Benchmarking Annual Report. And the report and the presentation are both online, linked to the meeting notes and agendas. Joe, would you just mind introducing briefly the speaker?
Yeah. Joining us today is Connor Daly. Connor is a energy coordinator here with the Office of Sustainability and Innovations. Connor started is it January, February, one of them.
January 29th.
Yeah, so, depending how you define starting. But either way, started here with us in 2024. Connor has been doing a lot of work, most notably, as he's here to talk about tonight, on the benchmarking ordinance, taking this program over. As many of you remember, Thea is the one who was previously running it, but when Thea was departing, Connor is the one who took over and has been just doing, as he'll talk about here, a lot of work to kind of get things to where we are right now. He's been just doing, again, a lot of work with both the 2030 district as well as building owners all across Ann Arbor to get us to where we are today. And all of that has led to being able to put out our first report, which I know is a topic that we've discussed many times here, wanting to see said report. So we have it now. I'm happy to talk about it. I will turn it over to Connor.
Testing. Well, thank you all for having me. It's exciting to be able to give this presentation, so I will get right to it. First, Connor Daly, he, him. I am an energy coordinator with OSI's office, the city's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. Like Joe said, I started in January, technically, of 2024, and took over managing the benchmarking ordinance in May of 2024, after Thea's departure. So what I'll mainly focus on tonight is the report recently published summarizing basically where we are with the ordinance and what's coming next. The report is 66 pages, so I'm not going to cover every single page, but I'm happy to take questions at the end about anything presentation or report. What I'll start with is a brief background of the ordinance itself, then get to some of the key findings from the report, compliance rates, data accessibility, data accuracy, and any trends we can see at the moment in the data we have. So starting off, as you probably know, benchmarking is specifically called out in the 820 plan in the Strategy 3, significantly improving the energy efficiency in our buildings. The ordinance itself was passed in October of 2021, and it required properties to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager, a free tool through the US EPA, to track their energy and water usage and then report that to the city through the tool. Taking one step back to start, you probably remember from the recent greenhouse gas emissions inventory presentation that about 2/3 of our emissions in Ann Arbor come from buildings, about 38% of those coming from residential and commercial properties. While we have a lot of programs that target residential properties like single-family homes and smaller under 4 or under properties, or 4 or under units in a property like the Home Energy Advisor Program, the Home Energy Rebate Program, and the HERD Ordinance, benchmarking looks at those larger multifamily properties, 4 or more units, and then commercial properties. So those other sections of those two emission sectors. It is the first step for addressing those emissions, and it specifically targets properties that are over 20,000 square feet of gross floor area. That could be one building that's over 20,000 square feet, or a campus, as it's called, of property or of buildings that collectively are over 20,000 square feet together. Why benchmarking? So I like to say at first that when we're looking at building performance, we can't improve what we can't measure. When we're looking to improve building performance, we want to know where we're starting, we want to know where we're going, and we want to know where we're at along the way. Benchmarking is not only something that is beneficial for us at the city as we're looking to develop programs for commercial and multifamily housing. It is helpful for the decision makers at those properties. That could be owners or managers that are looking to make improvements to the properties, or it could be for tenants who are looking to rent spaces in those properties. We do also see that there is energy use reduction associated with benchmarking. The EPA themselves did a study of over 35,000 buildings that used Energy Star Portfolio Manager over several years, and those properties on average improved their energy performance by about 2.4% per year, which is small in itself, but over time a pretty significant reduction in energy usage. I can, if that's I don't know, I've never presented before, address the public comment question about the scorecard here. It is a mock-up from our benchmarking compliance software, and the numbers will come from the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which from the EPA, they do have specific conversion factors that they use. I imagine that's the discrepancy, but I'm happy to look into that specifically. As this, if we want to get into it, this is actually an example from our benchmarking compliance software of a scorecard that a building could get once they're benchmarked of, here's your performance, here's a easy to digest for someone who's not technical about this at a building owner or manager level, how you're performing, what the cost is, what are some basic next steps to take. So as we're developing those scorecards, I'm happy to dig into the numbers more, but I imagine it's because of the specific factors that Energy Star portfolio manager uses when they do their conversions. Looking at who is benchmarking at the moment, this is in the report. Apologies, it's a little small. If you can make it out, great. If not, it is in the report. But the top line numbers here are of the properties currently benchmarking, participating. We see that multifamily properties are the most common property, and they account for the largest gross floor area of properties participating. Participating meaning they have started benchmarking, they are in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, they are gathering data. They may or may not be completely compliant, but we know who they are, we know what they are, and we know how big they are. So multifamily being the largest and most common, office properties being the second most common and the second largest gross floor area, and then the remaining 30% being split between a wide variety of property uses. I will say specifically there that currently multifamily properties account for 57% of the gross floor area. As we increase participation and compliance rates further, it's likely to change. I'm not sure how much that may affect the actual ratio of properties, but obviously we'll keep an eye on that as we get there. So in the ordinance itself, it does specify some key dates to start. The original deadlines are on the left on the presentation here, and these are the deadlines the ordinance set, which were the first deadlines to submit a benchmarking report. That would be for the previous calendar year's worth of data. So if we're looking at a property that is 150,000 square feet of gross floor area, that property initially needed to submit a report by June 1st, 2022 for calendar year 2021 data. Like I said, I started in January of 2024, took over in May of 2024. Approaching that deadline, we realized a few things. One, while data was available, processes were there, they had been refined and were being refined. With that and the smaller properties just having reached their first initial reporting deadline, whereas some of the larger properties had reached their deadline years before, we extended the enforcement deadlines for the ordinance. Where enforcement deadline came about was as the ordinance itself was phased in over several years, and not all properties would even have reached their enforcement deadline by June 1st, 2023. Enforcement was intended to start after all properties had been phased in, so after June 1st, 2024. So what we decided to do was to delay enforcement deadlines to the dates on the right. This did not change anything required about the data required to report. That 150,000 square foot property still needs to submit or needed to submit by September 1st, 2024, their report for 2021, 22, and 2023 data. So it was just the date after which enforcement would start if necessary. I'll emphasize a couple times in the presentation that while there are fines in the ordinance and we could take enforcement action if necessary, it's not the goal. Benchmarking gives helpful data to everyone involved in a building, and that's the goal. If necessary, we can, but it's not the goal. And so far, when we've gotten to the right person and walked them through what they need to do at a property, they have taken the steps to benchmark, whether complete or in the process. Not only, depending on how you phrase it, public buildings, but city properties also need to comply with the ordinance. Specifically, buildings or properties in the city owned by the city that are 10,000 square feet of gross floor area or more, and they are owned, leased, or managed by the city such that the city regularly pays all or part of the annual energy or water bills. Where that ends up is that 7 properties are currently covered by the ordinance. The properties that are not are either outside the city, like the Wheeler Service Center, and not subject to the ordinance, or they're under 10,000 square feet of gross floor area, or in the case of parking structures, we own them, we pay no utility bills. So with the 7 properties covered, here's some quick rundown of them. The site EUI for these properties decreased from 2021 to 2022. For terms here, EUI, just for those listening, is energy use intensity, so the energy used by a property per unit of area, square footage in this case. Site EUI is the energy that is used on site, so that's what you're going to see on your energy bill. Source EUI for these properties increased from 2021 to 2022, and then decreased from 2022 to 2023. Source EUI is, again, energy use per unit of area, but that is the total amount of raw fuel that is required to operate a property. It not only includes energy that's used on-site, but it includes transmission or losses during generation, transmission, distribution of energy, and Energy Star considers it to be the best way to look at a commercial property's performance across the board. Speaking of conversion factors, Energy Star has different conversion factors nationally that are used to determine the source energy performance for benchmarking properties. So that's that. Total greenhouse gas emission intensity, that's pretty straightforward. That decreased from 2021 to 2022, and it stayed about the same from 2022 to 2023. Lastly, water use intensity increased from 2021 to 2022, and then decreased from 2022 to 2023. While it's not required by the ordinance, OSI is actually benchmarking all city properties. Most of them are actually mostly benchmarked, but not subject to the ordinance, not included in these metrics, and a couple things may be needing to be addressed in their reports as we go through them. So we're working on the rest of them, even though it's not required, and I'm happy to give updates on that in the future. So getting into the main findings in the report itself, already covered this, but again, currently multifamily properties are the most common property type, and they take up the largest gross floor area of properties benchmarking so far. Looking at performance, the property types right now with the highest EUI are ambulatory service centers, laboratories, and restaurants. And the properties with the lowest EUI are parking garages, non-refrigerated warehouses, and worship facilities. Overall, we are seeing that larger properties tend to have a lower EUI, but that is more likely to be from the property use type rather than inherent in larger properties. What we are seeing is that multifamily properties are disproportionately likely to be those properties over 100,000 square feet, and they are, as you can see, one of the lower EUIs in terms of property use types. So that's more likely to be that rather than inherent in every larger property. We see the same trends with greenhouse gas emissions. The same property types, as it could make sense, are the highest and lowest greenhouse gas emission intensities, with laboratories, restaurants, and ambulatory service centers being the highest, non-refrigerated warehouses, worship facilities, and parking garages being the lowest. Things are different with water. The properties with the highest water use intensity are fitness centers, health clubs and gyms, hotels, and residence halls and dormitories. I'll note here that the residence hall and dormitory property use type does not include U of M properties. U of M is not subject to the ordinance, as is, so this would be a non-university owned dormitory or residence hall property. The properties with the lowest water use intensity are non-refrigerated warehouses, parking garages, and then what comes across in Energy Star is an other technology science use, which is essentially the specific property is basically a manufacturing office. It's not just an office, but it's not a manufacturing plant. It's just kind of this weird other middle zone that Energy Star defined as the best use for it. We also look at the percent of energy use that properties have from electricity when we're looking at how properties are changing their energy use at the property overall. So currently the properties with the highest percent of their energy use from electricity are parking garages, laboratories, and hotels, with the properties with the lowest percent of energy use from electricity being K through 12 schools, worship facilities, and residence halls and dorms. I'll note here as well that this does not include the Ann Arbor Public Schools. While the Ann Arbor Public Schools are benchmarking all of their properties, they are also not subject to the ordinance like U of M, so their metrics are not included here. These would be private K through 12 schools that are covered by the ordinance. I'll also make one note there that if you're looking in the ordinance, the Ann Arbor Open School technically falls under a city-covered property, so it isn't actually included in the city metrics. The Ann Arbor Public Schools, though, because they're benchmarking their whole portfolio of buildings and looking to the improvements they can make, we are making sure that they have the data needed to create their report, but they essentially own their benchmarking report. It's this weird gray zone of where properties fall for city properties. Moving on to data accuracy and accessibility. We do find the data is generally accurate across the utilities that our properties are using, with some variations in exactly how accurate it is and the issues that are there that affect accuracy. Overall, Constellation Energy is the most accurate data, followed by the City of Ann Arbor water data, and then DT Energy data. On the right, you'll actually see an example from DT's data automation portal of what it looks like when a property comes through with electricity up top, complete, and then in this case, gas data, which seems to be incomplete. I'll get to this in a future slide, in a couple more slides, but this is a focus we have on addressing and understanding data accuracy across utilities when we receive data. In terms of accessibility, data is pretty generally accessibility, but how exactly accessible it is and how it can be accessed does vary across utilities. For example, DTE and the City of Ann Arbor have automated data available, whereas Constellation Energy does not. On the other hand, DTE's automated data portal can be tricky to enroll in, and we put a lot of energy and effort into getting the city's water automation process where it is now, which is great, but it was a lot of work to get there. Constellation, on the other hand, does not have any data automation, but we found that their data is very easy to obtain and high quality. So wrapping up, we also found that compliance is an issue, and it is a common issue. It is a common issue for almost every jurisdiction that implements a benchmarking ordinance. For example, the City of Detroit recently passed their ordinance, and in their first year, they had about a 24% compliance rate by November of 2024. The City of Indianapolis got to about, I think, 20% in their first year. So it is a common issue to have low compliance rates across jurisdictions that have this. We found that in increasing our compliance rates, robust, repeated outreach was essential, and that data automation was also helpful. The less that properties need to do, the more likely they are to comply, and it increases the sustainability of benchmarking within ownership and an organization doing that benchmarking for a property. Moving forward, we are looking to increase compliance, increase data access and accuracy, and to benchmark more city-covered properties than those required by the ordinance. We're also looking to do even a deeper dive into the data we have so that when we are building future initiatives for commercial and multifamily housing, we have a better idea of what the benchmarking data is telling us as we build those initiatives. And on the right here, you'll see an actual building that is benchmarking in our portfolio that had significant improvements in their gas use efficiency, which is reflected in just the quick, easy chart up top, but then in the actual metrics from Energy Star, seeing over that almost 1 year, significant improvements to their Energy Star score, their EUI, and then importantly, the cost of their energy also we see decrease. So compliance rates. Compliance rates increased about tenfold over the course of 2024. Starting off, we had about a 3% compliance rate for 2023 and about an 8% compliance rate for 2021. And as you can see, that is now leveling off at about 32%. As of when the report was created, I'll say 32% compliance and then 78% compliance for 2021. Participation rates are unsurprisingly higher. Again, that is properties who have started benchmarking and either don't have all their data. For example, DTE does an automated data push once per month. We're actually getting that this week as we speak for this month. Or they may have all their data, but maybe they look extremely efficient for that type of property or really inefficient. And we want to make sure that their data is correct before we move them into compliance. Diving a little deeper into data accessibility, going one by one, DTE is obviously the largest energy utility at the moment in the City of Ann Arbor. Almost every property uses them for electricity, if not electricity or gas. You can get data in essentially 4 ways from DTE. A property owner or manager could get data from bills. Issue with bills is that one, it's all manual, it's a lot of work. Also, a property manager and owner usually does not have all the bills for a property, so it's not going to capture tenant data, and that means it's an incomplete report. You can also directly request your data from DTE by email with a form. Also manual. Also, that data, I actually don't know that any property has chosen that route. There are just other ways to do it and better ways to do it. It also is likely not to give, let's say for a 150,000 square foot property, it probably won't actually give them data back to 2021. So not the recommended process. A property owner could actually use their landlord portal online through DTE, and that would usually actually get them their tenant data as well, but it also usually doesn't go back to 2021 like some properties need. So the recommended way to get data from DTE is to use their DTE Energy Data Hub, which is a automated data portal they've set up, which provides aggregated building level data for benchmarking properties, and it connects to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So when it connects, it will automatically upload data into Energy Star Portfolio Manager into the future, significantly reducing the amount of work required to comply. That said, it is a little tricky to enroll in it sometimes. If the person benchmarking is not the person who has access to the online DT account and/or is not an authorized user on the DT landlord portal, it can be tricky to get that worked out just to get the form signed and enrolled. That said, the portal itself is excellent and is a real help to a lot of buildings doing that. And DT is working on a slight easing of the process to do that enrollment. The other barrier is that DT has kept the data hub in a pilot phase due to the cost of running it at scale for the entire DT service area. So properties enrolling in the data hub just need to join the Ann Arbor Washtenaw 2030 district to enroll in the hub. It is free to join, and the district offers free support for benchmarking, working through DT's enrollment process, submitting the report to the city, and solving anything with the report that may need to be fixed after the report is submitted. So it is completely free to join, free support, but it is another step to get to the data for DT. Constellation is a choice energy provider and is the only one I've encountered in Ann Arbor so far. They mainly provide gas data. There's a couple properties that have electric data from them. From Constellation, again, you can use your bills to get data, but that does not always capture all the property's usage if there's tenants who have their own separate accounts. Conversely, from DT, you can actually request your data directly from Constellation from a representative, and it is actually very quick and easy to do that. And it comes in a very digestible format to then re-upload to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. You can also download data from Constellation in your online account. That, kind of like the bills, you may not get all your tenant data. So depending on how a property is structured in their metering, an online account or direct requests to Constellation usually are pretty good. It would be nice for Constellation to add data automation. There are benefits to it for the longevity of benchmarking, but so far it's not been a barrier to properties getting their data from Constellation. The City of Ann Arbor water data, we are the sole water utility in the city, and you can get it, again, your data from bills. Same issue, depending on the property, you may not have all the bills for the usage. You can also use AquaHawk. Some of you may be familiar with. AquaHawk was actually launched before the benchmarking ordinance was implemented, and it is a water data dashboard that water utility customer can access to see pretty granular data down to the hour for meters if you want to. You can download usage from AquaHawk, also in a pretty digestible format to re-upload to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. But the recommended process we have is to use our data automation process we've set up. It's a lot of work on the back end for a property. It's basically setting up your property in Energy Star, setting up your meter profiles, connecting with a city managed account, and then our city managed account through an API created by our IT team and customer service pushes meter by meter water data month by month for every meter linked to it. It took a lot of work on the back end to get that to where it is now, but it works very, very well. So it's the recommended process for that. In terms of data accuracy, DT is generally pretty accurate. Most properties have a gap here and there, often something that wouldn't affect their report too much, but there is a small subset of properties that have had more severe issues, like one multifamily property that had hundreds of gaps. Small, but hundreds. Another property that had one big gap of 2 years for half of the property. Those are pretty rare, but the bigger issue we're finding is when properties have these small gaps is when it's presented as it was in that slide that had the gaps in the data. If it's a multifamily property where the unit has a gap of 1 month in the summer and they have gas heat and it's vacant and the AC isn't running, that might not be a gap. That may be no usage that's coming through as a gap. But if it's 3 months in the winter, that's unlikely to be that. So how can we understand that better when this happens? So we're working with DT to better understand that when it comes through. That said, it is rare. And in the case of that property with extended gap of 2 years, DT, it took a few months to fix, but they kept on it with us for 4 months, and it is now almost completely fixed. Almost all the data has been corrected. So can take time, but DT does work with us to resolve that. I'll note that the data hub has 2 dedicated staff who run it, so it is helpful to have 2 specific people we work with on this. For Constellation Energy, we find that they're generally very accurate. It's pretty rare to have any gaps at all, and if there is any, it's usually 1 or 2, very short, just some meter issue and it skips a read. The worst example we found was a property that had no gas usage for several years, and it was just a physical meter issue. With how Constellation uses their energy, it actually was a DT meter, so we worked with Constellation and DT to fix that meter, and now it's getting readings. So one benefit, practically a benchmarking there. One thing I don't know how impactful it is, but it certainly plays a factor, is that properties have much fewer Constellation meters. So that property that had hundreds of gaps in the DT meters, over 200 individual DT electric meters, it had one Constellation meter and one Constellation account for the whole property. As an example. City of Ann Arbor water data, touched on a bit. That is generally very accurate and can be very granular, especially if you're using your AquaHawk portal. We find that almost every gap in that data is due to a meter or meter transmission unit being replaced. So if a meter breaks and it needs to be replaced, that will result in the gap in data. It's usually pretty short. It can be longer if there's something like a cable needs to be procured that is on back order somewhere, something like that. The main difference between the gaps that we see with water data versus data we see on the energy side sometimes is that we can almost always explain what the gap is. One, because it's pretty reliably some kind of equipment related issue, and because we are the city and it is another area of our organization, it's easier for us to work through and find those issues than working through multiple layers of a separate organization. So wrapping up with some trends as of now, the trends that we're seeing right now looking at 2021 to 2023 data are upfront, they're just not representative of the overall building performance in the city. Reason for that being is that as the ordinance was phased in, 2021 has only buildings over 100,000 square feet, whereas 2023 has buildings that are 20,000 square feet or higher. So the types of properties, the sizes, what they are is just different across there. So what we're going to be looking at for sure is when we get 2024 data, that's going to be more apples to apples with 2023 data to look at actual trends across the whole portfolio overall. That said, what we're seeing so far is that, as I mentioned earlier, larger properties tend to have lower EUIs and greenhouse gas emission intensities and tend to have higher water use intensity, which is more likely to be because of the property types at those sizes of properties. That said, in those compliance years, site and source EUI increased from 2021 to 2023. Again, more likely to be from the types of properties being phased in there rather than the overall Ann Arbor buildings increasing or decreasing their efficiency over that time. We actually see, though, that greenhouse gas emission intensity increased from 2021 to 2022, but slightly decreased from 2022 to 2023. And then similarly, water use intensity increased from 2021 to 2022, and then decreased from 2022 to 2023. So wrapping up with that, we're going to be looking when we have 2023, more apples to apples onward, see really what those trends start to look like with the more fairly compared property portfolios overall. And with that, I will take any questions you have on the presentation or report.
Thank you, Connor. It's really encouraging to particularly see the contours of the program laid out, and I think I particularly appreciated the granularity and the details on the data acquisition and quality overall. I would just sort of, for some questions, just some things to think about also is for the commission, what, both in terms of the trends that Connor presented as far as the benchmarking. Also, I think one of the things that would be helpful for the commission to think about is sort of what are some of the takeaways and how do we sort of look at what the report and the presentation suggests in terms of priorities as a result. So just as a way of framing that a little bit more too. So I'll open it up for questions from commission members.
Yes.
Councilmember Ricks.
Yeah, apologies for coming in late. I just a point of clarification, the residence halls and dormitories, is that sororities and fraternities? Is that primarily what that is, or?
I don't want to, so specifically that, and one thing I'll also note with that is that some property uses thus far may only have 1, 2, or 3 properties in there. So it could be one property in that type. I'll say that I think that one is it is actually not a fraternity or sorority house. It is a nonprofit student housing cooperative of some type for that. A lot of the fraternity sorority houses, off the top of my head, are just under the square footage for 20,000. Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question. Thanks for the presentation, first of all. Very informative. If you've looked at sort of like how things like temperature during the winter, how that compared over those years when we're looking at a decline in energy use potentially. I'm curious how seasonal weather may have affected that. Also, maybe with water use especially, it would be interesting to see like water use in the summer versus winter and how much water, like how, was it like a drought year so we use more water or just how that affects the overall trends year to year?
That's a good question. For energy, for sure, what the EUI that we are using is, Energy Star uses regional weather data to do a weather normalized EUI. So it takes that weather into account year to year, so it's a more apples to apples across year to year. I don't know that there's anything like that for water data. That said, when getting into the nitty-gritty of benchmarking, when we do water benchmarking, we do separate out meter by meter in Energy Star, and it's labeled generally as such of indoor, outdoor, sprinklers, so on. So one example of what the Ann Arbor Washtenaw 2030 district is trying to do with their properties is if they have sprinklers or irrigation is look at that usage, separate it out. How much could you save on water and potentially bills? Looking at things that you use in the summer that you may not need to use in the summer, and really diving into that different usage seasonally, if that answers that question. Okay.
Commissioner Berkowitz.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I want to give congratulations to the City of Ann Arbor and the Office of Sustainability for implementing this. It's remarkable to think about. There are, huge cities all across the country doing benchmarking, but Ann Arbor, to my knowledge, is the first one in Michigan, maybe paved the way for Detroit, adopting their ordinance in 2023 and starting on their program. And I've heard rumors that Grand Rapids is exploring this and maybe even Lansing. So just want to say thank you and kudos to start off. A couple comments and questions. So first comment, noticing the data trends from 2021 to 2023, one of the thoughts I had as well was that maybe one of the reasons for the increase is that, in 2020, we had this pandemic. In 2021, we were not really still out of it yet. And so I think just a lot more people were in buildings of the commercial scale versus residential over time, during the period that's mapped here. So I wouldn't get too bent out of shape about it. That seems like a pretty understandable trend. And then I had a question. So you mentioned, first of all, the U of M properties are not subject to this, and just talk through the dorm residence hall side of it. You mentioned the same thing about the Ann Arbor Public Schools, that they are not part of this. They do their own benchmarking, but you guys help and support. But you did say there were other like K through 12 schools in the portfolio. Can you just help me understand what are those?
So I'll be upfront that we are waiting for a final legal take on individual property report disclosure on exactly what that looks like. So I try not to identify the buildings by name. I would also be happy to follow up afterwards with a little more information on that. But they are, one example of what it could be is let's say a K through 12 property use at, let's say, a religious institution that has that as well. That could be an example of what that is that doesn't fall under the Ann Arbor Public Schools. That's actually not what those are, but without identifying them, that's an example. It is not necessarily even what, it is what the business is, but even in a specific property use could be divided by space in that property. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of what that could look like without it being an Ann Arbor Public School property, but still being a K through 12 institution, for example.
That's a really helpful example. Thank you.
And I'll say on the site EUI increasing, again, it's more likely to be the properties phasing in, but in terms of the post-pandemic performance, specifically at office properties, that's something that I'm interested in. And I know we received a question in advance about are there other metrics that would be helpful to look at, or is this all we're looking at? And this is not the only metrics we'll be looking at. We will be looking at all sorts of metrics, especially as we look to future initiatives that this data could be helpful for. So these are top line numbers in the report, overall performance, especially with this being the first report this year. But it is something that I've been thinking about of when we're looking at some of these trends, like at office properties, do we see a big increase or not? Absolutely.
Yes.
Connor, good to meet you. Also, fellow commissioners, good to see you in the flesh. I don't think I've ever actually seen even Joe in the flesh before, so it's really nice to be together and see people. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Really good. I'm really happy to see this going. And I'd like to start out with an additional compliment. I reached out to Jan Culbertson, who I've known as a friend since high school. I won't say since when that is, but it's a long time. And I had a couple of questions, and I'll read you her very first statement. Connor is doing a great job, encouraging and supporting people to comply with the ordinance. So thanks very much. I think most of you know Jan is the lead of the 2030 district. And so I really appreciate you working together with the district and with all these other entities to get this going. I have a couple of comments and questions. First of all, I have to admit, I only looked at the slideshow, and I didn't look at the 66-page report, and I don't know if I'll do that. But a couple of questions. In Concordia University, does it apply to them, and are they participating, and are they complying yet? Because that's obviously a large entity.
First, I'm taking notes on my computer, so pardon my typing.
That's fine, sure.
Secondly, I can answer questions one at a time or all at once, whatever you prefer.
Why don't you go ahead and do them one at a time, because they may not be related all that much.
So Concordia University specifically, this gets into the ordinance's definitions for covered properties and the exemptions for spaces that do not have traditional commercial leases or rentals in spaces. Concordia does not actually have anything leased, and while they do have dormitory residences, those, per our legal understanding, through legal's decision, is not actually covered by the ordinance. So Concordia does not have to benchmark their properties.
Okay.
Yep.
Good to know. In terms of compliance, I'm disappointed in our landlords and building owners. I mean, I assume that if the city sends out a property tax notice, then the compliance is pretty high. And Jan went through a whole bunch of issues, as you mentioned, that have been problematic in terms of getting participation and compliance rates up. Why is it so hard to get people to comply?
Yeah, so without speculating too much, and also caveating that a lot of before my time, I don't have a lot of insights into, but what I'm finding from my experience is that, one, on the tax bills, the benchmarking is not noted on the tax bills. It's actually something, I'll take a step back and say that the 2030 district, we actually have a contract with them for support, and they do a tremendous job. They support us and properties through every step of benchmarking, and I appreciate all the kind words, but they've done a lot of work as well supporting me with this. Mm-hmm. When we have been doing outreach to properties, surprisingly, a lot of properties have not heard about this when I give them a call, even some who have supposed to be benchmarking for a few years. And I think there's a number of things that go into that, including nitty gritty. We sent postcards this year to building owner addresses, to the owners themselves. And that got a lot of people who got back to us. And it was the first year we did that. So going into the robust outreach, diverse outreach methods have been helpful. Call, email, property managers, owners, postcards. I've even called tenants sometimes, like, hey, can you pass this message to your owner? I'm having trouble getting hold of him, and it's worked. So doing that repeatedly, but also in diverse ways, we found that some properties just need to be contacted differently, and they just haven't heard about it. Frankly, it's been a few years. They've had turnover as well. Mm-hmm. So one thing, as we're not only increasing compliance rates, is thinking about how we make this sustainable in those organizations. Mm-hmm. in terms of compliance, I wouldn't necessarily say that we are unusually low for a city in their third or fourth year. I was a little surprised to see that it is an issue across jurisdictions, and I know Jan was sharing with me recently that she was looking at a bunch of jurisdictions, and 75% compliance rate is great. 95 is excellent and extremely uncommon. So it is lower than we'd like, but it's not out of line with a lot of jurisdictions. And as you saw from the participation rates, I'd expect our rates to increase significantly this year with continued outreach.
That's what she mentioned to me too. She said, I think Cambridge is 95% compliance, and they've had the program for 10 years.
Yep.
So
if we
unfortunately, but on the other hand, we don't have 10 years to really start to make this work. I'm hoping that you can pull up slide 5 and spend some time talking to us more about the report that you showed there. Can you go back and...
Sure.
And as you're doing that, my sense is that how buildings compare, I mean, some of the comparisons that you drew, is really less important than what I would call peer-to-peer performance. So how does a fitness center compare to a fitness center? How does a parking garage compare to a parking garage? How do parking garages in Ann Arbor compare to parking garages elsewhere? And so the idea or the fact that, let's say, a fitness center has a higher EUI than a parking garage is really not all that illuminating. I think what really isn't illuminating or important is, like I was saying, how do fitness centers within Ann Arbor compare to each other? How do they compare to them nationwide? What are the trends like? Is Ann Arbor decarbonizing or reducing its energy and water use intensity faster or slower than in other communities? Those are the kinds of things that I think are really, really important, and what I would like to see hopefully addressed in future reports. And I'm hoping that you can, I don't know if you can blow up that portion of the slide, but maybe you can just do it with your cursor. Tell us a little bit more about the report. Jan told me that there was a survey done of commercial buildings in 2003, and the U.S. Department of Energy has set some targets within building, I'll call them classifications, for reductions compared to that 2003 level. She said it is 25 to 45% by 2030 and 50 to 65% by 2050, I think it is. No, let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think there's a date she left out. In any case, it seems to me, like I said, that is really, really important. And I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit more about that, how that information is conveyed to building owners so that they get a sense of what their performance is against true peers, as opposed to, like I said, a warehouse compared to a fitness center compared to a whatever.
I can, yes. And they are different metrics that we're looking at for different purposes. So we, as OSI, are going to look at this data not only at individual properties for how they should individually improve, but also if we're looking at initiatives that are benefit commercial and multifamily properties that are looking to decarbonize, what uses should we target? When we're comparing them across property uses, what should be our focus? What will be most impactful overall? What will be most impactful for a specific use? So that's where comparing across property types comes in. That said, what Energy Star Portfolio Manager does is it compares apples to apples. The Energy Star score that a fitness center gets.
71 out of 100.
Yeah, so like this one, for example, multifamily, I believe, this would be, that 71% is it's a bell curve, so that is more efficient than 71% of comparable properties. Mm-hmm. And it compares not only by the property type, but there are a bunch of calculations that it does on the back end for the square footage, Parking is included, gets really specific, but enclosed, partially enclosed, open parking, that's included too. If like some of our multifamily properties do downtown, they have a small restaurant underneath. That is also included in the overall property EUI. And it compares, when you look at your weather normalized site or source EUI in Energy Star, it is going to also show you the relative performance to comparable properties of your size, use, and so on. So while we did focus on broadly the portfolio overall, Energy Star, what it does is compare you to other properties. So when we look into doing these scorecards for more properties, that's going to show. Like, for example, it's hard to make out here, I apologize. But in that top triangle graphic, you can see kind of where it's sitting.
Right.
So
there's that tiny little
if I can
indicator there,
if I can
right?
rest some assurances that is what Energy Star does. So I didn't focus on it as much here, but certainly as we were looking at what to do with this data, use to use comparisons we'll be looking at, but then also within each of, do certain sizes of multifamily need more when we're looking at their EUIs to do that. So yes.
Let's say I'm the recipient of this report, and I got a report a year ago, and 12 months has passed, and a lot of other things have, come at me. How do I remember, or how does this report tell me any kind of trend information? So this year, or let's say now it's 12 months from now, last year was 71. How will I know that my 71 dropped to 65 or maybe even worse, or that I improved? And how can I see from each annual report whether I went from 71 to 65 to 60 to, and so on and so forth? That, it seems to me, would be really, really nice, and to be in one report as opposed to me having to pull up something that says this is what you looked like 12 months ago, 24, 36, et cetera, months ago.
That's a good point. First, I can say that, granted, it's a little more technical, but if a property owner is doing their benchmarking in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, what they'll see on their overview page is that it is going to show them over time, and they can change the years that they compare. And again, with the sustainability of benchmarking within ownership or management, now that we are increasing compliance rates, one of the next steps is how do we make sure that not only does compliance continue, but that they're not setting and forgetting with the automation that we are doing. Automation helps compliance, but we don't want them to set and forget. I know the 2030 district, for some of their members who the district actually uses the same software we use to track benchmarking beyond Energy Star, they are generating their own scorecards for their members separately. And what they are doing is, for some of them, is sitting down with those properties. Here's your scorecards. Here's what you might want to do next. So what we will be thinking about is exactly that. As compliance increases and it is easier to do, how do we make sure that doesn't get lost and that property owners know how they're performing and know what they should be doing next? So we are thinking about that, definitely. In terms of targets, overall 820 is carbon neutrality, so I can't speak to specifically what Jan was referring to, but that said, if the commission has any interest in specific targets you want to know about or that we should consider, you're obviously welcome to share that. But again, also we're going to think about that as well. Yeah. And when we're developing future initiatives that might focus on these property uses, the targets might be different for different properties.
Oh, yeah.
What a multifamily property does versus a restaurant is going to be very different. So
for sure.
We'll make sure to incorporate that as well.
In terms of targets, I assume targets will apply for basically certainly the foreseeable future, because even if let's say a building is carbon neutral because it's all electric, it's still consuming energy, and so it will still want to understand, and water, and will still understand whether it is doing so efficiently and whether it's continuing to reduce its energy use intensity, even if it's carbon neutral.
Definitely. So again, not getting into specific targets, but yes, if a new build was all electric, we still want them to know how efficient they are.
Yep.
When they're built. Exactly. Yep.
That's all. Thank you.
Saw a question over here.
Here we go. All right, thanks. This is really very, very interesting to me. So the Ann Arbor Charter Township has, last year, we set up our facilities, in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And just like listening to your presentation, which is really great, is helping me understand further ways that the township can utilize the data. And one of the things that I wanted to make a comment on was a previous question that was asked regarding, why isn't there higher reporting, higher compliance? And it's tricky to set it up. And from what Connor's responses have been in his description of the process, is the person who actually sets up the account has to understand. It has to know the building very well, because there's a lot of very specific questions that are being asked about not just the utilization, but the square footage and a lot of other detail. So that's part of one of the hurdles as far as setting it up is concerned. That was something that was challenging for us as well. But also, when you said sustainability, do you mean like as in ongoing reporting to the city, or what?
Yeah, if I'm catching what you're referring to, I'm thinking of the sustainability of benchmarking in a let's say the owner of a multifamily property. Odds are, so far, the owners are not doing the benchmarking. They're ultimately responsible for it, but it's the property management and maybe a third-party service. So if that property manager leaves and they were the one doing it, we want to make sure that that is sustainable to continue within the organization. Am I answering that?
Right, and also, so one of the things that I learned in setting up the account for our different facilities is that there is a contact, email that can get lost during transitions.
Yeah, so
Okay.
This is going to be really technical. You'll learn more than you needed to. But so each account in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, each property has a property data administrator, and that is the highest level of permissions an account have. If that person leaves an organization, then that property can still be transferred, but it's trickier when you don't have that person to log in. So one thing I am advocating for is that properties use a general email they have, so it's not one person. Even if that's the person doing it, it's a city@annarbor.gov. That's not city email, but you know what I mean. So that can continue. That said, within a property, you can have different users that have different permission levels. And I haven't had to do it, but my understanding is that Energy Star Portfolio Manager support can actually transfer properties and help you with that if something were to be lost. But in terms of specific access, that is something that we've run into of, I think we started this before, but they can't get to it. So we have to find the person with the login, transfer something, and that is an issue we've run into once in a while. Yep.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And I can also say that, it is complicated to set up properties, but one thing that I'll say again for the data automation, it is helpful for DT, for example, to have the automated data portal. What you do need a lot of information, but it's relatively, depending on what the role is, it can be easy or hard to get, like number of units, all the service addresses. For some commercial properties or more like municipal facilities, it can get a little trickier because of some of the things you need to know. I can say frankly for things like our water treatment plant, Energy Star has specific things for water treatment plants. They have a whole webinar that I've been to on benchmarking water treatment plants. But it's weird. They have flow meters for all the meters through there. We found that our water treatment plant, I did the flow meter, but building usage is not separated out. So that's something we found in there. But it gets really intricate, in different property types. Setting up data center usage. There's a whole way to do that, depending on the equipment type, how it's powered, where the meter, the usage is measured. So it's kind of a roundabout way to say it can be really tricky for properties, and we're trying to ease that, especially when we have a lot of properties who are multifamily or office properties, trying to get kind of streamlined ways to do that.
Okay, so it's going to be a little bit, the numbers are going to, just as far as participation, will creep up year after year as you contact the right people. It seems kind of a challenge, is really getting a hold of the right person.
Yeah, it was, especially early on, it was a challenge to get to the right person. And especially getting the data itself, let's say we find the right person in to do the benchmarking for a commercial strip mall. They say, yep, I'm doing it. Tell me what I need to do. If they don't have access to that online DT account, or they're not an authorized user, that's great. We found the right person. Now we need to figure out who has access to that and who's listed, or get that person added so we can get that data. So it is finding the right person to do it, finding the right person to get the data from the utilities, and then, or if it's a really specific question, like, I don't know if we have sprinklers. I have to talk to my maintenance manager about that now too. So also catching when we start to get to those scenarios of, oh, you mentioned you have irrigation. Let's catch that before we get to that later. Or up front, do you have access to your DT account? Do you know who does? If we can find that out up front, that also helps out a lot when we're getting started with a property. So trying to catch those pain points early. And we're getting better at it as we get more properties through the process, certainly. I imagine the same thing with the 2030 district. When they're helping other municipalities, they're probably learning a lot about municipal facilities and the intricacies there.
Well, thanks for giving us that granularity, because it really helps us, everybody understand what the process is and what the challenges are.
I will also say that a lot of different properties types can be benchmarked. If you own a single family home, you can benchmark your own home and see what that looks like a little bit. You won't be able to use the Energy Data Hub, but if you just use your bills or download your usage from your account, you can go through it for that as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to clarify one thing. So I reread what Jan wrote me. It had to do with targets. And what she wrote is 2030 derives their targets. And what she means by that is the 2030 district derives their targets, not the city. But what I would like the city to do is think about targets. They wouldn't be binding. But what their targets are, they're derived from a percent of a 2003 commercial building energy consumption survey. And they're the 2030 district, so if you're a member of the district, you're being fed targets. In 2025, the target would be 35 to 45% of the 2003 median. And by 2030, the goal is 50 to 65%. And I don't know why the range is so big, of the 2003 median. So the 2030 district has targets, and it might make sense that we as a city start to communicate a target, quote unquote, to buildings, which is, let's say, commensurate with what we're trying to do with with our A20 plan. Did that make sense? What I just...
It does, and
okay.
We certainly something we will be looking at is what our goals are for energy use reduction. I think, if I can clarify, I may have missed it. Those percent decreases are in greenhouse gas emissions, I believe, not energy use overall. Is that right?
Could be. She didn't say what the unit is.
I believe that's it. The 2030 district as a whole for its members has specific targets, not only for greenhouse gas emission reduction, but also vehicle miles traveled reduction.
Right,
and
yeah,
I believe those
that's
percents are greenhouse gas emission, not 35 to 50% of energy use reduction.
She just says they run the buildings through the zero tool to generate the 2003 baseline to calculate the target. And I'm
loosely aware of how they set their metrics. So
you could touch base with her and go from there. She's the expert.
Weekly.
So, good. The one last thing I would say is what we're seeing here confirms the motto, what gets measured gets done.
Exactly. Councilmember.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. It is clearly like a treasure trove of data that, can lead to so many great things. And I know I, for one, will definitely be checking out Aquahawk. Had never heard of that before, so I'm really interested in that. And then also, you just saying that you can benchmark your own house. Definitely will be looking into that. I had two quick questions for you. You mentioned a lot of percentages and things related to participants. Do you have the outright number of properties participating right now? An aggregate of everything. I just click
not the exact number, but it is in the report, actually.
Okay.
And it gets more granular than you may want to know, or you may want to, but I do break down in the report, I believe, the total number of properties who are initially covered based on the overall initial criteria in the ordinance, like multifamily and commercial properties over 20,000 square feet of gross floor area, period. after we take out properties who are not subject to the ordinance, like University of Michigan, Ann Arbor Public Schools, I believe I have that number. And then the percent of the currently required properties who are required to comply with the ordinance who are not exempt, which will show you the number out of the properties who are not U of M, not Ann Arbor Public Schools, properties for that compliance year who are not vacant. Those can be exempt as well. So things like that, taking out exceptions, it will show you, I believe, the number who are then required to, and then the number who are compliant.
Perfect.
So different levels of those. So when I look at compliance rates, I'm looking at the properties who have to comply.
Right.
They're not exempt, they're not U of M, they're not vacant. So there are more properties who may be covered, or a property who's vacant one year and is not another year. But that's that percentage of who needs to, who is.
Perfect.
But there are more levels to it in the report.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll look for that. My last question then is, so like I said, this provides a crazy amount of data. In what ways, I guess, is the city, planning to use some of this data beyond just this specific exercise? And I'm thinking, one of the metrics that was reported was average percent of energy from electricity. Some of the lower percent of energy use include K-12 schools, worship facilities, residence hall dorms. Are those, for instance, then facilities that the city might target to try to electrify or provide extra resources, noting that they're already kind of lower in the electric use? Is that something that's, on the city's radar and ways to use all of this data?
Yeah, a lot of the metrics that we're looking at are going to be on our radar, but I imagine we are going to look at electrification and then relative energy use intensity across properties. I can't speak to specific initiatives yet, but with that answer is that we're going to try to take all of this data to look broadly of, we see worship facilities seem to be using a lot of gas. So yes, let's do some outreach there and see, is there interest in electrification? What are the barriers? What's the interest? Restaurants have maybe an even split, but they're really energy use intensive, and it's really tricky to electrify in some cases, or some unique barriers there. And like, what do different uses need? What do they want? What can we do? What resources can we have available to them? What's feasible? And kind of take a broad look overall, and then start looking at what we should target. And I'll say that if the commission has thoughts or priorities that they want to communicate, I think you have to go through Joe, but you can let Joe know what you want us to look at. We're going to be looking at a lot, but if you have priorities, please communicate that. Also, I don't mean to skip over specific numbers. I can say for the number of properties, I believe generally the total number of properties by square footage is somewhere around the 700 plus number. Okay. The total non-permanent exceptions, you could say, like U of M, is closer to 400 and something. And then the total, depending on the compliance year, like for 2023, excluding some other exemptions, is just under 400 or so. Okay. So overall, it's about, you could say, 375 to 400 properties moving forward. Hopefully we may have some new buildings coming in as well, but in that range is the total number that we're working to get compliant.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I look forward to seeing where this kind of data and stuff plugs into various initiatives and seeing where this goes. So thanks.
I agree. It was really interesting to look through the data. Frankly, it was really exciting to see some things start to emerge. Yes.
So a couple questions. Enforcement is approaching. So can you remind me what that looks like?
In terms of the process itself, or
process, or what tool? I'm sure I approved this. I can't recall the details around enforcement, and if that's a.
So I can say that OSI has enforcement capacity. Mm-hmm. I am not the person who would write tickets, so I can't speak to the specific process too much. What I will emphasize again is that we are going to be sprinting hard at compliance, and our goal is to not issue tickets. Mm-hmm. We probably will have to, but our goal is not to. The goal is to get the information to folks. With a tenfold increase last year, I'm optimistic we can get really, really high compliance rates. If we have to ticket, we will, but that's not the goal. I'm sure we could get some more details on exactly what that looks like after the meeting. I'm not the one who would issue tickets, so I don't have a lot of information on it.
It was $500. Yeah. That's what I heard. Okay, yeah, I just couldn't quite remember.
Isn't it 500
So
for the
it's-
initial, up to 1,000 per day?
Up to 500 for the
Okay.
first offense, up to 1,000 for each subsequent offense. And the offense definitions are in the ordinance, and
Yeah,
then
I'll
it
have
gets
to go back
beyond
and-
my
It's okay. I'll have to-
purview.
I can go refresh my memory on that one.
Yeah.
And then on the, obviously, other communities are providing, saying that our compliance and, it's to be expected in terms of where we're at. Are we comparing our data to other communities in terms of seeing if our benchmark data is sort of in terms of building types and usages is fairly comparable across communities?
And that's a question I didn't answer from Commissioner Mursky either, by accident. It's not something we've looked at yet, and I don't know if, what we theoretically probably could do is look at all of the properties shared with our Energy Star profile and look at how that compares overall. It would do some data work, but step back, Energy Star for every property will at least show how it compares to the national median. So we could dive in deep into all the properties, sort by use type, and see overall, on average, how we're comparing nationwide. I would have to look further into comparing to specific properties or specific other jurisdictions and how they're performing. But I will put it on my list because that would be interesting, especially with Detroit having their first year of benchmarking as well, seeing if comparable Michigan communities have any kind of trends that we can see.
Yeah, and part of the reason I asked that is I would assume that, we're obviously leading in some areas, and then in some ways, obviously, we've got other communities that are ahead of us, and so being able to turn to them in terms of, obviously, we want building owners to take action, and so kind of what has been successful in terms of moving the needle for those different types of building types. I suspect there's been some learning curves across communities for that, so it's part of where I was going with that question.
It is definitely something we'll look at. I'll say not all the metrics that we're looking at got into the presentation or the report because there's it's like 300 something metrics that Energy Star can generate. What I will be and have looked at a little bit is, on average, how our properties, the average EUI compared to the national median. And we are seeing that some property types overall tend to be more or less. But getting into that, we are also, the in-between step is working with the utilities to make sure the data is accurate. If we're seeing a property use compared to the national median is 70% more efficient than the national median, we want to make sure that that's accurate if we're looking to compare to not just the national median, but other jurisdictions. So long answer of yes, that is something that we're interested in. And I'll look into the best way to do that to specific jurisdictions. And then also on what do we do next? Also something we'll be looking at is what have other municipalities done when they're looking to target initiatives to help properties become more efficient? What have they done? What have they learned? Also something we're looking at.
And then I suspect this differs by property size, certainly, but in terms of the taking action component, we're going to be obviously measuring progress on what types of actions being taken, but thinking about the type of work that it's taken to get compliance and get this information up and going. We've, to some degree, cultivated a small group of experts in our own community around their building type, and maybe they're the ones that are getting the reports, but they may not be the ones who are charged with taking action. I guess it probably depends on property size, but I'm wondering if there are ways that we're thinking about how we might be able to. Is there a disconnect, I guess, between those user groups, and then are there ways to be cultivating that group that actually has maybe a more in-depth knowledge now of the energy usage within their buildings?
If I can clarify I think correctly, the concern being that we're maybe working with folks who are doing the benchmarking, but not those who will be deciding whether to make improvements to properties. Yes, it's something that I am thinking about, even down to the level of, for multifamily housing, property managers probably doing the report or working with their billing service, but does the property manager or the service manager, are they involved at all? Do they have the time Do they have the capacity? Are they ready to? If a furnace goes out, can they put in a heat pump? Are they ready to? Or are they just going to get another gas furnace because that's quick and easy? So it is something we're thinking about when we look to future initiatives of when we're looking at different types of properties, what are all the barriers, including maybe let's say a restaurant that doesn't own their building and they need to do some work that involves working with the property owner. Restaurants can't stay down for weeks waiting to figure out what to do with their HVAC system. So something we're thinking about is not only the disconnect, but how do you get properties ready to do that if they're not ready to now? Because they don't need to necessarily do everything today, but if they know their furnace has 5 years left, how do we get them information to start that conversation now? Absolutely.
Commissioner Berkowitz.
Just hearing talk about enforcement and next steps sparked something for me. Just a comment. Last year, we had a little working group that was researching the incentives or disincentives for gas usage in buildings. And a lot of the research kept leading me back to building performance standards. This is essentially like a requirement that buildings, become more efficient or use less energy or emit less greenhouse gas emissions or water usage as well. And I don't want to get ahead of anything, but I'll just say the vast majority of cities across the country that have passed or adopted building performance standards, most of them started with a benchmarking ordinance and getting the compliance levels up, figuring out how it works, talking through all of the things that you just laid out, Connor, like all these nuances and intricacies and the difference between all these portfolios and the privacy issues and things were kind of the path that I think that it took a lot of them to get there. So I'll just say that, if at some point in the future, the council, the city is interested in requiring buildings to hit something, or Commissioner Mirsky mentioned setting targets for the benchmarking performance, this is, I think, a key piece in getting there if that ever were to be a policy that folks wanted to pursue.
I'll briefly touch, and Joe can add if needed, on I think by design, building performance standards need some type of benchmarking so you can track it, but currently we're not able to, we would not be able to implement them on the local level due to preemption by the state. So if we were looking at targets, it would be goals for properties and goals that we're looking to help them get to, not requirements.
I'll just say I don't think that's the case for building performance standards or building emission standards. Those are not preempted by the state, to my knowledge.
And expound it. I maybe used the wrong terminology.
I don't have
like building codes are, but
we've gotten some guidance around difficulties around it. I'm not sure what the exact specifics are, but yeah, as of now, it seems to be there is something blocking it to some extent.
Absolutely, and I'm not suggesting that we go into this with if there's fuzzy areas in there. There a lot of cities like New York, they're defending their building performance standard right now at the courts. So want to wait to see how that court case shakes out. They have a strong case; they should be fine. But the city of Ann Arbor wouldn't want to jump into this until all of the legal situations are settled. But I do think there's authority. Anyway, would love to talk about that more offline if and when that ever becomes a pertinent conversation here.
I can't speak to the authority, but I can say when we are looking at initiatives, that is part of the conversation of if we're not requiring this, we need to make sure we communicate the benefits of this to properties. Here's the initiatives, here's the benchmarking, here's the opportunities. Here's the cost savings you could have, especially if it's an owner that pays part or all of the energy bills. So without the requirements, showing them that there are benefits to this. And talking to them about what they want. What are your goals? Do they align? How can we help? All questions we'll be trying to ask.
Amen.
Just one quick question, and then just clarification, and then we'll move on. With respect to the compliance around the multifamily and office buildings, that seem to be higher on average, and I was just hoping if you might be able to clarify whether that was primarily due to, and my assumption is that there may be teams managing those buildings, and so there's capacity in a sense to do the work around the benchmarking. And I was just wondering if that was something you were able to comment on, the accuracy of that assumption, or if there was something else maybe happening, and if there's, given if that were true, one might imagine that some additional support around benchmarking might be beneficial for those other buildings that might be having, trouble navigating that, which I think is already there or happening, but.
Can I clarify? It's not this slide. It's the compliance for the calendar year 2021, or this as well. I can touch on both.
Yeah, I think it was this one. Yes.
So this is when we looked at the metrics for who's benchmarking. Actually, I think this is in the start of the report, but in the metrics in the report for who's benchmarking, we looked at everybody who has started because we know who they are, what they are, how big they are. For compliance and the actual performance metrics, we looked at compliant properties because those are compliant. They have generally accurate data. Mm-hmm. Participating properties could be someone who has set up their account and has gas data, but no electric data, no water data. So here for participation, this is just folks who have started. And getting to, this will be a kind of a long and maybe specific answer on property uses and the intricacies, but when we were focusing on compliance because of how the compliance and enforcement is phased in, we first looked at 2021 calendar year. Larger properties tended to be those multifamily and office properties. So by nature of the chronological prioritization, they were the more office and multifamily properties have started. I'm actually not, I could look into this more specifically, but it may not even be the case that multifamily properties are more compliant than other properties when you get to the number of properties. In terms of participation, that is at least part of why multifamily properties are a high percent. One, they are a lot of square footage and they are a lot of properties, but we focus on those larger properties that tend to be those. In terms of what is easiest and the barriers, I'm really interested to see how that shakes out. As we alluded to earlier, large properties can have a lot that they have to work out. If you have hundreds of meters, how many are there? What are the service addresses? Do you have irrigation? Do you have this? Do you have that? The properties themselves get more complicated, and benchmarking support or utility billing companies don't. It helps, but they're often not on site. So it is kind of a conversation amongst a lot of people. I had a Zoom call with the 2030 district and 8 members from a property support group because they had 2 properties in the city and different people working on different properties. So getting everyone together to try to work through that. When you have a smaller property, you may have less people to work through, but they have less resources to dedicate to helping you with that. So I imagine there's going to be different challenges. I'm not sure which one's going to be harder or if one will be harder. In terms of DT specifically, a smaller property, there's just probably fewer people to work through to figure out who is on the account, rather than contacting your finance department to contact the benchmarking to support, to figure out who does, to run it through corporate to get access and permission to be added to the account, and then do it. So they have more resources, and some properties have even not used the data hub because they get all the bills and they bill tenants through utility billing, and their company does all the benchmarking. They don't need anything from us. A lot of properties do. So there are different challenges at different levels.
And third-party billers too, which is another layer. Yeah.
Or in one case, the 2 properties, same management, same utility billing and benchmarking support company. One had paid for benchmarking services already, one hadn't. So then they added that. So I'll keep an eye on it. I'm not sure what's going to be harder because there are different challenges to it. When it comes to and I'll bring up the data hub a lot because almost every property has chosen to use that because it's just the best way to do it. There definitely could be some ways that smaller properties have an advantage to just less layers to work through for that. But when it comes to other parts, it may be tougher. It may be one person who runs the whole or is the property manager and does all the work, and they need now to go figure out how many meters there are here and there. So definitely we'll see different challenges. And we could look further, especially when compliance rates increase, to see if there are differences in property uses that will tell us potentially exactly what you mentioned of who needs more help. Yeah. Is it different sizes? Is it different types? And that we can look to put our support to the places that need it the most. Yeah. Right now it's been chronological focus, but I imagine that will come into play as we pare down who needs support.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And thank you, Connor, for the presentation. Clearly, this is coming into a lot greater focus and clarity, and this has been super helpful, I think, for everyone to make sense of not only the program, but also to start to think about the contours of it and how it's going to pan out in different ways. I think we speak for everyone in wishing you lots of encouragement and success with helping roll it out and improve it over the next year or two. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will note for the report, it is 66 pages. It's a lot of charts and pictures, so it's not quite that long if you want to look through the whole thing. It's a lot of charts and pictures in a good and bad way. There's a lot in there. So yeah, and again, any questions you missed tonight, send them on over. There's a lot in there. I know it's the first report you all have seen, so anything that comes up, please let Joe know, and we'll get answers for what we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll be moving on to commission business. We have on the agenda Energy Commission 2025 priorities. I'm hoping this will be a fairly brief discussion in the sense that we heard from Councilmember Briggs and Councilmember Malik last month on some of the priorities having to do with the SEU, as well as comprehensive plan and perhaps some of the things that might come to the commission regarding those. I will note that for the next few months, some of the things that we've sort of scoped out in terms of the agenda have to do, obviously this month, in terms of the building energy benchmarking ordinance. Next month, I think we are planning for an update on the rebate program through OSI in the city around energy rebates. In the months following, I believe we want to look at energy use intensity reductions in new construction potentially, and the potential for some recommendations around that, as well as an update on the SEU rollout as that matures as well, and that develops through OSI in the city. So those are some of the things sort of now through the next few months that we're looking at and that we sort of have scoped out a little bit for the agenda. But in terms of, I'll just raise and open the question now in terms of other broader priorities that we want to focus on that we might have missed in that update for the commission. Commissioner Mirsky?
In the list that you just mentioned, you did not include a reconsideration of the resolution first reviewed by the commission in September 2023 of levying a carbon fee. Was that embedded in one of the topics that you mentioned, or is that something that wasn't on the list and is therefore not likely to be considered in the next several months?
That was the one when I was mentioning the one associated with the energy use intensity and new construction. That was sort of embedded in that as well. So I know that's being worked on and potentially being brought to the commission in the next month or two. And so I think we'll plan to take that up when we see it. Any other comments or suggestions? Okay, we will move on then to the staff report.
I'll do my best to be brief. It's a little longer than normal. But I believe most have heard, but just in case anyone has not, the City of Ann Arbor, we did receive a $10 million grant from the U.S. Department of Energy's Community Geothermal Technologies Office to begin implementing a community geothermal heating and cooling system in the Bryant neighborhood. For those who've been following, this award funding represents a second phase of support to Ann Arbor from the U.S. Department of Energy. The first phase supported that deep engagement with Bryant residents, as well as our different collaborators, to understand the heating and cooling needs and design a system capable of meeting those needs. This second phase of funding will allow the city, under the newly created and ongoingly created Sustainable Energy Utility, or SEU, to build and operate a community geothermal system to provide nearly all of the heating and cooling needs for all 262 homes in the Bryant neighborhood, along with the expansion to the local elementary school and the community center there, as well as across the street as funding comes in. Over the next several months, the city and our partners will be finalizing the details of this geothermal design and initiating the contracting process with the goal of having a fully operational geothermal system in Bryant by 2028. We are also currently hiring for an electric vehicle coordinator. This position is grant funded and is focused on developing, co-leading, and supporting the identification, planning, development, implementation, and deployment of incentives and electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout the city of Ann Arbor. I mentioned the position is grant funded for a period of 4 years, and if you or anyone you know is interested, let them know. The job posting is on the A2 Jobs website. Starting back up in 2025, trying to remember the years here, but you can join us at the downtown branch of the Ann Arbor District Library for the first session of the 2025 Sustainability Forum series and hear directly from the people who are expanding Ann Arbor's urban tree canopy, creating beautiful rain gardens to manage stormwater and reduce air pollution, and establishing native plant gardens to support our local pollinators and learn how you can be part of those initiatives. We're happy to announce that Peace Neighborhood, in partnership with the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainable Innovations, was selected as one of 22 community-based nonprofits for the Buildings Upgrades Inspiring Local Transformation, or BUILT, funding opportunities through the U.S. Department of Energy. Peace will be receiving up to $100,000 for efficiency improvements that will lower their energy consumption and save costs on their energy bills. Those dollars can go directly back into the critical care services they provide to our community daily, and the funding is helping them with the foundational work in Peace's transition to becoming another resilience hub here in the community. These next two are repeats, but just as a reminder, the City of Ann Arbor OSI is inviting members of the public to contribute to the 820 Community Cookbook, a free cookbook to help promote our work towards sustainable food ecosystem. The deadline to submit recipes, tips, and stories is February 1st, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. And then lastly, the ambassador applications are still open. Folks can join the 7th cohort of 820 ambassadors to gain increased knowledge, tools, and resources to discuss sustainability broadly and specific actions you and your community can implement to advance carbon neutrality. Folks can learn more at osi.a2gov.org/ambassadors. And that is all.
Thank you. We'll move on to reports from council.
I guess I have an update. Trying to get my brain back into the space of remembering what we did. So one thing that was notable in the last council meeting is that we moved to postpone a phase 2 study for the municipal energy utility to make sure that we were sort of in better alignment with community between the different entities that have interest in this subject. So that's likely to, I anticipate that will come back to council for consideration at some point, but I know some folks who are paying attention to Energy Commission meetings are also tracking what's going on with potential phase 2 MEU study. So.
Good. Just by way of clarification, are there any elements of that that would be worth it for the Energy Commission to consider and we or weigh in down the line?
Potentially down the line. I mean, I think one, we have to get to the contracting for a phase 2 study, which we have a contractor in mind, but assuming we contract for the MEU has to get past that, getting to the results, and then yes, I would anticipate that there is going to be interest and need for the Energy Commission to share some thoughts as well.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what that timeline would look like.
Yeah, thank you. And then, did you have a comment on that, or yes? Okay, go ahead.
Frankly, I was disappointed to hear that staff went directly to City Council with a recommendation of a phase 2. If we all remember, I think it was in 2022 or 21, where we devoted nearly 3 meetings here in the Energy Commission, where we had probably over the course of those meetings 35 speakers from the community, including many from Ann Arbor for Public Power, where we talked about the idea of a phase one, what it needed to include. We developed a resolution on that. And in this case, that completely bypassed this commission, which is supposed to be making policy recommendations to council. And I'll just leave it at that. That was a disappointment. And I would think that it would be a disappointment to the rest of the commission as well.
Okay. And then any updates on Environmental Commission?
The Energy Commission met last on the 12th of December. The Environmental Commission met prior to that and did not have a December meeting after that, and its next meeting will not be until this one, so there's no updates from the Environmental Commission.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our last opportunity for public input. Again, this is an opportunity for the public to speak for up to 3 minutes, and if you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This is displayed on the meeting agenda and on the video feed, and city staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number. Please press *9 on your phone to electronically raise your hand and your desire to speak, or come up to the podium if you'd like to speak as well. When speaking, please move to an area, mute any background sounds, and please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Any callers?
I've got to turn this back on again, I think. There we go. You think I would have this down by now? So yeah, thanks for the great discussion. It's still really great to be with you here in person. Yeah, on the benchmarking, I'm really glad the city is making real progress on this. And as you touched on, it really opens up some possibilities of leveraging this data and this information in order to get better performance out of buildings. You know, I'm especially glad that Commissioner Berkowitz brought up performance standards, which I know nothing about, but seemed to, on the face of it, seemed to make a lot of sense. There was seemed to be some disagreement over how legal that is, and this sort of echoes the discussion around the green rental housing ordinance. I mean, both of these involve, you know, existing buildings, but the city seems to be invoking, you know, a well-known state law called Act 230, or the still the Rossett-Hale Single State Construction Code Act, which was designed and is intended to create a uniform construction code across the state of Michigan, but doesn't explicitly apply to existing buildings. And to the extent, so it's a gray area, I think, and I would love to get some legal clarity over how much that law applies to, you know, our existing buildings, because that's not, I've read it, it doesn't really talk about existing buildings at all. But that seems to be the inference of our city legal department. So, yeah, I know Commissioner Levin has legal expertise, but it's, I don't want to put the whole burden on him, but I would love to get some clarity on that question, because I'd love to see performance standards, and even something like Cambridge, Massachusetts has done with their larger buildings, which is to put a fee based on benchmarking performance that would be levied in the future. I think 2035 is the date they have, but would have impact on how buildings perform now in anticipation of that. I'm not suggesting that we go that way. I'm just saying that it would be nice to know what we can do legally as a city. So, but in the short term, I'm really happy with what's going on with benchmarking and finally, and I'm happy you guys are meeting in person. So I hope we can do more of these. And then thank you again for all your work.
Thank you. No further callers or attendees.
Thank you. And last item on our agenda is our items for the next agenda. As I previously mentioned, we're aiming to have a discussion and a presentation around the rebate program and an update on where that stands. And is there anything else that I didn't touch on that might be useful? Yep.
Yeah, I would
Commissioner
like
Murphy?
to address one other topic. It's a topic that I addressed with you about via email, and also in a Zoom meeting. The Energy Commission currently has 9 members. The bylaws allow for up to 15 members with 2 council member liaisons. That means we only have 7 at-large members versus 13, which could be the case with that expertise and those personal experiences, et cetera. We have no youth members right now. I've brought this up repeatedly, probably, I think everybody knows, every other meeting or so. And I frankly don't understand why over the last 18 to 24 months, this is already before members started dropping off in May of 2023, why those seats haven't been filled. I'd just like to add to that, that reflects my concern that the Energy Commission isn't valued as a policy recommending body as it once was in the past. I just made comments about the Phase 2 municipalization study. If you look at the work that the Energy Commission has done in years past versus which it's done more recently, I think there's a number of other indicators. In the past, Missy, as a department head, used to attend all the meetings. I recognize she's managing a much larger department, pursuing grants worth millions of dollars, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at, we're getting a lot more reports as opposed to really looking at policy recommendations. And I just want to express publicly that I'm concerned about the future and, frankly, the present in terms of how the Energy Commission is valued as a partner in decarbonization. We know that the globe is warming. It's now 1.6 degrees above pre-industrialization. We know that the globe and the country and the city are not decarbonizing fast enough. It seems to me this is a case where we need to have all hands on deck. And right now we have a commission that only has 9 hands on deck, and we could have 15 hands on deck. And I'm wondering if anybody's willing to comment on that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, for my part, I apologize because I had fully intended to follow up in more detail on that question with other staff and council members too, in between the commission meetings, and that slipped through my hands in the last month. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to prioritize that too, also in the next couple of weeks, just particularly next week as we set the next agenda, to just make sure that I follow up on that topic as well, just to get some clarity around where we're headed with things as well in appointments. I don't know if there's, Councilmember Briggs.
And, simply to state from the council perspective, and as previous commissioner, myself, before I was on council, I served on multiple commissions. I recognize the desire to, fundamentally, let me just say, we greatly appreciate everybody who takes their time to volunteer and serve the city on every commission across the city. It is, you could be using your time in other ways, in other spaces, and the fact that folks are willing to come and serve on these commissions and take your time and your energy and provide feedback, it's really valuable. And maybe it doesn't seem as valuable in some ways to provide feedback on a report like this. From my perspective in the council seat, it's incredibly valuable to have a set of expertise eyes that are outside of city staff. We don't, most of us on city council don't have technical expertise or in-depth knowledge. So to be able to go in and take a look at these reports and provide feedback both ways is it's a real service. And so I don't want to discount even the fact that reports are, that is coming to the commission. We really need that participation and insight that you can bring. We've talked about this over time, commissions, particularly Energy Commission, Environmental Commission, the changing departments in the city. There's a little bit of a learning curve in terms of, as we've grown our staff expertise, what do the roles of commissions look like, and particularly in this one, where when we increase our level of internal capacity, how does that shift at the commission table? And, we're kind of sorting through the pieces of that and trying to figure out, as council shift too, and we move forward with plans, how do we best position ourselves to have that advice that we need? And so it's not always smooth sailing. That doesn't mean that we don't really incredibly value the folks that are here. So I think we're, trying to sort through some of those questions and having cross-commission conversations around this. And, I'm sure we'll get to that in terms of figuring out next steps.
Yeah, offer one more comment?
Sure.
In terms of people that are passionate on energy and climate and their willingness to serve as commissioners, I'd like to point out someone here in the room, Mr. Garber, who turned in an application to be a commissioner many years ago when I was chair. I'm aware of other people. In fact, I made recommendations specifically about people who would be willing to serve. One who works 100% full-time in the energy field, in industry, is extremely well-informed. So, as I said, through this step-by-step reduction in the membership of the commission, we are missing an opportunity for people to weigh in on benchmarking, on municipalization studies, and so on and so forth. And as I said, we need all hands on deck. We need to decarbonize much faster than we are. That's no criticism of Ann Arbor. The whole globe is not moving fast enough, and we can only see the consequences of that in the last weeks in Los Angeles and every single week around the world. So I don't need to say more.
Comments well taken. Yeah, Councilmember Ricks.
I'm just going to add a little bit to that. I appreciate those comments. You're absolutely correct. We know that we have to move rapidly on this. I'm so proud of the city staff that we have that's working so hard on this, and the group of folks here that are putting lots of energy in. I mentioned having served on previous commissions prior to being on council. I also put my application into commissions that I did not get selected for. And so the fact that certain folks don't get selected for certain commissions, it's nothing to do with there can be whole lots of reasons for that. And so, that's greatly appreciate everybody's willingness and those who are serving as well.
I just want to thank, before we close tonight, I just want to thank everyone for being here and taking the time out to be here in council chambers and have the Energy Commission meeting tonight in person, and for the extra effort that took to get down here. I think it's very valuable, and I think it'll help set the tone for the next year as well, as we continue these conversations and move forward. So I'll say now that it's 7:55, and as chair, I adjourn this meeting and look forward to next month's. Thank you.